Live from Brussels, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Oliver Crook with your top stories. Oil spikes as the U.S. and Iran trade a new wave of attacks. Both claim control over the Strait of Hormuz as the ceasefire hangs yet again in the balance. Tech leads global stocks lower. Chip giant SK Hynix tanking on the Kospi today after surging in its U.S. debut Friday. And a reshuffle in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy removes his prime minister as the country seeks new support from allies in both Brussels and Paris. Good morning, good morning. Let's get you straight to the markets this morning as futures begin to trade lower this morning ahead of what we're expecting a very busy week ahead of us with CPI data, a great many things we're watching out of the United States. But there you see it on your screen. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index down almost 2% this morning, down 1.88% this morning. Eurostoxx 50 futures trading lower, down 1%, really doing better than the other two indexes we've got up on the screen. And of course, the NASDAQ futures 100, as you can see it there, down 1.4%. That is a sell-off that has really begun to accelerate throughout the morning. A couple hours ago, we were down 0.9%, and now, as you can see, gaining some pace to the downside across equity futures across the world. Of course, oil will be the principal story in the commodity market this morning. Brent up 4.2%, still trading just under $80 a barrel at 79.24, up $3.2. And of course, the U.S. dollar spot index trading a little bit higher this morning, up by 1.5 points, just about 0.1%. And of course, U.S. yields clearly in focus, up just about 2 basis points ahead of a very busy week for U.S. data. We have U.S. CPI data coming on Tuesday, according, as well as testimony from the Fed chair, Mr. Warsh, that will also begin on Tuesday, the Senate Banking Committee. And of course, on Wednesday, clearly this sort of outlier here within Europe, ASML, that will be following some of the banking earnings that we will have throughout the United States beginning on Tuesday. Well, we begin the week with oil prices higher this morning as the U.S. and Iran trade attacks yet again over the weekend. The U.S. Central Command saying forces hit dozens of targets in the latest strike. The latest escalation comes after Iran reportedly fired again at commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz as both sides issue conflicting statements on whether or not there is passage open in the shipping lanes over the strait. Let's bring in Abir Abu Omar, who is Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa anchor. So, Abir, another day, another question for you, a very simple one. What is the status after the attacks overnight, and how is Iran responding this morning?
And that is a good question, Ollie. So we're seeing attacks happening into the early hours of this morning, actually up until 20 minutes ago. We know that Jordan has responded to missile attacks by Iran. And so what happened overnight is really a repetition of the same patterns that we've been seeing over the past few months or so. Although it is quite uncanny that we're seeing this in the lead up or the aftermath of that MOU being signed about 4 weeks ago at this point. But essentially, Iran yet again hit a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. This was a Cyprus-flagged ship in the strait, and then the U.S. carried out another fresh round of strikes on Iran. More than 140 targets was reported by Central Command. The Central Command in the early hours of our morning in the Middle East saying that it finalized the last round of attacks. And Iran retaliating in the same patterns yet again, hitting countries in the region, namely Kuwait, Qatar, and Jordan. Qatar yesterday over on Sunday saying that 3 people were injured, including a child. Kuwait reporting some damage to its Kuwait oil company, the drilling department there. And so we're seeing a repetition of those patterns. And Ollie, at the heart of all of this remains the Strait of Hormuz. It does look like the other concessions in that MOU that was signed, have taken a back seat. It does look like the Strait of Hormuz is at the center of all of this. Now, we did report yesterday that there were 6 commodity carriers that transited the Strait of Hormuz with their transponders turned off. But as of the early hours of Monday morning, we're not seeing movement in the Strait of Hormuz. So back at a similar word, a standstill when it comes to shipments making their way through the Strait of Hormuz. And this is simply because Iran is threatening to attack ships that don't stick to the routes that it had laid out. So we go back to this argument of Iran really asserting dominance over the strait and the U.S. not agreeing to that, essentially hitting back. And so repetition of the same patterns again and again, and escalation in the region. We're not yet saying that we're going back to a state of warfare, kinetic warfare, similar to the one we saw in March with the entire region dragged into it, but definitely an escalation in the rhetoric over the weekend and into the early hours of today.
And Abir, it feels like the question we've been asking over the last few months is the strait open, is the strait closed? But are we now getting into a phase where the openness, it's not a binary of open or closed? Is that the new regime now where the United States is trying to assert control, saying, listen, put your ships through, while the Iranians saying, do not?
Absolutely. It does look like that is the rhetoric for the time being. So even yesterday, Iran saying the Strait of Hormuz is closed until further notice. The GMIC, the United States, President Trump and Central Command saying, no, it's actually open. You can go through the southern part of the strait. But then again, the question for ship owners here is really, do they want to go through with that risk, especially knowing that there is precedent? The Cyprus flagship is not the first one that was hit over the past couple of weeks. We know that this whole thing started this time around with the Qatar LNG-laden ship that was hit in the Strait of Hormuz at the beginning of last week. And so ships are deciding to go through with their transponders off. Other ships are deciding to hold still for the time being. It does feel like this whole war started this thing where it woke Iran to the fact that it can assert dominance over the Strait of Hormuz. And Ollie, let's not forget that once this negotiation period is over, now we don't know if we're going to see a return to these technical talks over the next few days or so, but once that negotiation period over the MOU is over in August, Iran has said it loud and clear, it will have tolls and fees go through when it comes to ships in the Strait of Hormuz, no matter who it gets help from or not, referring to Oman. And so it does feel like a new paradigm for sure.
Well, Abir Abu Omar, thank you so much. That's a Bloomberg Horizon Middle East and Africa anchor, keeping us apprised of the latest movements in the Strait of Hormuz. And U.S. Treasuries have fallen across the curve as those fresh strikes on Iran reignite inflation's concerns. Let's bring in now our Bloomberg strategist, MLive strategist, David Savage. David, thanks so much for joining us this morning. What should we be expecting heading into the markets this morning, into Europe and the United States, looking at kind of what we've seen in the oil market?
Good morning. Yeah, certainly, futures indicate that, the heavy selling we're seeing in Asia is likely to continue in the European and U.S. sessions as well. I think the Asia session looks, particularly, bad just because, the Kospi index is really exposed to this memory trade, this momentum trade, and it is really, that sell-off has really accelerated today. But I think concerning, for U.S. and European equities is that we've seen the futures sell off continue throughout the Asia session. So Nasdaq futures in particular had continued to grind lower, and I think that comes as well that we've seen oil prices hold on to its opening gains. I think we've seen time and time again that we've seen geopolitical tensions pick up again. We've seen exchanges in the Strait of Hormuz, and it hasn't always translated to a pickup in oil prices. Today, Brent opened higher and held on to those gains, and so that's really lit a fire under the dollar, and that's really weighed on risk assets throughout the Asia session.
So what are we expecting in terms of the longer term? I'm looking at the dollar index now, up about 0.1%, relatively tidy, but still, near some of the highs we've seen over the last couple of weeks. How do you expect that to influence risk assets going forward?
I think it's really interesting because it happens, of course, as you say, before we've had several big catalysts coming up this week. We obviously have earnings, but we also have some key Fed catalysts, and of course the U.S. CPI coming on Tuesday. So I think there's a real setup here where if the dollar keeps moving higher because we've got oil prices moving higher, pushing up real yields, it sets up a real interesting setup for CPI that if CPI disappoints to the downside, maybe it gets dismissed because oil prices are moving higher again, and so it's no longer relevant what happened in June. But if it surprises the upside, it might even put more upward pressure on the dollar, which is really weighing on risk assets. On the other hand, we have seen rotation in the U.S. even prior to today. We saw certainly last week we've seen healthcare stocks outperform, more defensive positioning outperform, and we've seen the S&P 500 more broadly outperform versus the SOX index. So that trend likely continues as we see sort of this momentum trade continue to come under pressure.
Well, David Savage, thank you so much. Our Bloomberg M Live strategist taking us through some of the market action this morning and indeed some of the things we're watching closely going into this week, including U.S. CPI. And stocks in Asia this morning in the red with SK Hynix dragging Korea's Kospi sharply lower. Let's get an update from Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Winnie?
Yeah, good morning, Oliver. You can really see that South Korea's Kospi index leading the broader decline today in Asia, with the Kospi, in fact, down more than 8%, just slightly back because of kind of the drag from the SK Hynix. But at that point, when the Kospi was down more than 8%, we did see the exchange triggered another circuit breaker and have the trading halted for about 20 minutes. We are seeing trading resuming right now with the Kospi down about 7%. But still, the big question is how sustainable really is that memory trade? Because today we have SK Hynix down about 13% after having its U.S. ADR listing on Friday. Now, some investors are saying that this is a bit of a profit taking after that U.S. ADR listing having jumped about 13%. But others are talking about more concerns when it comes to a potential peak out of this memory trade. And also, we are seeing some local brokers saying that the expectation for the second quarter earnings is actually going to be a miss. Now, we are seeing South Korean won here leading declines within the Asia currencies as well. Flip the board, we take a look at the broader Asia market because, yes, tech is leading broader Asia lower with the MSCI Asia down about 1.5%, headed for its lowest in about a month. However, when it comes to the sentiment, it's not just tech, but also how geopolitical tensions as well as the higher oil prices are weighing on Asian stocks as well as the currency space. We have the stronger dollar weighing on broader Asian currencies with the Japanese yen at one point weakening to the 162 level against the dollar again. Now, flip the board, we take a closer look at some of the tech stocks because, yes, SK Hynix leading broader memory stocks lower with Samsung Electronics and Kioxia both leading declines. But the bright spot is, in fact, in TSMC. We are seeing the stocks here up almost 2%. Now, Taiwanese stocks are actually closed last week due to the typhoon, but trading back online today, and we are expecting that June sales to be released later today in the show, and also some more optimism when it comes to the upcoming earnings later this week. Minimax here down about 16% with some concerns around value dilution because of the recent fundraising. So investors not quite convinced about how the AI models in China can in fact really provide that profitability after having burned so much cash already. Back to you, Ollie.
Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Thanks so much, Winnie, for that run through this morning out of the shares in Hong Kong. And SK Hynix shares slumping in Seoul this morning, as we've just been discussing, after the memory chip maker's highly anticipated U.S. trading debut. Speaking to Bloomberg after the U.S. listing, SK Group Chairman Che Taiwan said that the conglomerate has ambitious plans to invest more money in the United States, betting that demand for chips will only continue to grow.
I have some confidence that the demand will be grow. And our supply capacity never going to catch up. It's going to be until that our society, human society, has that there was some settlement with the AGI. Then, well, I guess that that's a kind of normalize at all the cycles. But anyhow, that until then, well, we need that a lot of memories.
So to take us through a little bit more deeply what we're seeing in the tech sector this morning, we're joined now by Bloomberg senior strategist Neil Campling. So a good day for SK Hynix on Friday. Neil, not such a good day this morning, down about 14%. To what do we account this weakness?
I think, Ollie, there's a couple of factors at play here. I mean, for one thing, we had a massive 100% increase in the stock in the last 3 months. In anticipation of this event. And so there is that element to bear in mind. Now, in addition to which, you've got a situation where there are funds which are being adjusted for. There are ETFs being launched around this offering. And there was even a local broker out this morning saying that Hynix's earnings that are upcoming could actually be slightly below where expectations are. And that's partly reflective of consensus numbers having moved so high in recent weeks. So there is a certain sense of travel and arrive, if you like, to the stock price reaction. One thing that is for sure is the volatility around this stock, which has been very high and twice that of the market volatility, is likely to continue for some time based on all of those different factors.
And so elsewhere in the sort of AI complex, a story that broke late on Friday, and I wanted to sort of give us the context of its significance, is now that Apple is suing OpenAI for trade secret theft. This, of course, will hang over the sort of IPO. How significant do you consider this, Neil?
Yeah, there are a couple of significant factors to this, Ollie. The one for sure is that we have seen some issues in the past where OpenAI has been in court, obviously, with Elon Musk at the center of that. And also in terms of Apple itself, it has lost a whole range of engineers and senior executives to OpenAI, not least of which was the developer of the iPhone in the first place, of course, in Johnny Ive. So it's a setback for OpenAI. You don't really want to come to market for an IPO when you have these kind of circumstances hanging over you. And certainly OpenAI needs to come to market because it does really need to raise money to fund their massive AI ambitions. So it's definitely a setback.
Well, Neil Campling, thank you so much. Our strategist this morning, taking us through some of the action, SK Hynix, and of course that lawsuit that now hangs over the OpenAI IPO, expected a little bit later this year. Still ahead, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham dies suddenly with wide implications for U.S. foreign policy, as well as the President of the United States. We'll discuss that next. And he had just come back from a trip to Ukraine, where also we have some a shuffle in the sort of a domestic story there. The President of Ukraine getting rid of the Prime Minister ahead of the winter. We'll get some of the details for the significance of that at that sort of pivotal moment here for Ukraine. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has removed the nation's prime minister as part of a political shift in strategy in the run-up to another winter under threat of Russian attacks. Bloomberg understands that there is a CEO of the state-run energy company Naftogaz is alongside a former prime minister are two of the options under considerations to replace the former prime minister. Let's get more from Bloomberg Russian economy and government editor Greg Sullivan. So Greg, bring us sort of the latest here. Why is Zelenskyy doing this at this sort of critical moment in what feels like negotiations with a changing tide? Donald Trump speaking sort of very favorably towards the Ukrainians, but of course in the lead up to this winter.
Well, there are several factors behind Zelenskyy's decision to reshuffle his cabinet. One, of course, is, as you just mentioned, the winter. Zelenskyy seems very focused on the upcoming winter. Last cold season, Russia really pounded Ukrainian infrastructure, hitting energy and power supplies and causing some pretty severe electricity disruptions, as well as disruptions to heating and water. That imposed a lot of hardships that depressed morale in Ukraine, and Zelenskyy wants to, at all costs, avoid that. What's interesting here is that we understand that the two frontrunners for the potential for being named prime minister both have deep energy experience. So clearly Zelenskyy is thinking about how to keep those supplies. On one hand, there's Sergei Koretsky, who runs the state-run Naftogaz. It's interesting to note that last winter, even amid electricity disruptions, there were no shortages of gas. So that's clearly on Zelenskyy's mind. And also a former prime minister, Denis Shmyhal, who is currently the energy minister. So energy supplies amid the upcoming winter is very critical for Zelenskyy, and he even said so in his statement. So that's a lot of what appears to be going on here behind this reshuffle.
And of course, one of the staunch allies in the United States, of which there are sort of ever fewer in the Trump administration, particularly on the Republican side, Lindsey Graham, died suddenly over the weekend, notably after a visit to the Ukrainians. And obviously, he's trying to push through his sanction package, those so-called bone-crushing sanctions on the Russians. How significant do you think this is for the Ukrainians?
Well, I think there's definitely some trepidation in Kyiv and in government circles in Ukraine. Look, Graham had a very unique position. On the one hand, he was a Republican senator who had Donald Trump's ear, and on the other hand, he was a staunch defender of Ukraine. And that was a unique position. We know that Trump at times has held various positions on Ukraine and sometimes been rather critical. And here you have Graham, who is able to sort of pull Trump back from those more extreme impulses on Ukraine. In just the last few days before Graham's death, he was in Ukraine, met with Zelenskyy, toured a drone factory, and managed to help broker an agreement among senators for additional Russian sanctions. So clearly they've lost a conduit to Trump that was very important. And it's not exactly clear who can fill that gap for Ukraine going forward, given Graham's unique position between the White House and the Senate and also foreign leaders.
Yeah, and we've got some meetings across Europe today. In Brussels today, the foreign ministers will be meeting to discuss, among other things, the 21st sanction package from the EU on the Russians, but of course also this meeting of the Coalition of the Willing in Paris. This is a term that we were hearing a lot about a couple of months ago, sort of faded to the background. Now that we seem to have renewed optimism on Ukraine from the President of the United States, initiative on the battlefield, what is the Coalition of the Willing now discussing and need to do?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, for one, as you mentioned, it does seem that Zelenskyy is coming into this meeting on the right foot. As you said, there were some nice words from Donald Trump at the meeting in Ankara of NATO leaders. But there are important things that he needs to discuss. And one of them is air defenses. As we said, the winter is coming. Russia has been pounding Ukraine with ballistic missiles, and Ukraine has run low on air defense supplies. In the NATO summit, one of the key asks Zelenskyy had was getting a license to domestically produce these Patriot anti-ballistic missile systems, which he seemed to secure from Trump. But he's still, there's no doubt that Ukraine is still running low on interceptions, and ballistic missiles are getting through. And that's at the top of Zelensky's mind and likely to come up. He's also going to, it's expected to be a deal announced that Ukraine will be able to buy British weapons using EU loans. So these are among some of the things that will be on the meeting when he shows up in Paris today.
Well, that is Bloomberg's Greg Sullivan joining us there from Dubai for all of the latest in the movements there in Ukraine. But coming up next, we'll take it to the corporate sector. Japan's Nippon Paint seeks to buy AkzoNobel's decorative paint unit for almost $9 billion. We'll have more on that next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now to some corporate news across the world. Bloomberg has learned that Nippon Paint has made multiple offers for AkzoNobel's decorative paints business in the last month. Sources tell us that the latest bid values the unit at about $8.6 billion and would reunify the Dulux brand globally while expanding Nippon's paint footprint in Europe. We're told AkzoNobel has yet to engage with that proposal. And Softbank and PayPal are said to be considering buying a stake worth several hundred billion yen in 7&i Holdings in a deal that would unite Japan's biggest convenience store operator with its dominant payments platform. We're told 7&i and the operator of 7-Eleven stores may issue new shares to be acquired by Softbank and PayPal. And China has reportedly asked top ratings agencies to cut back on AAA designations for higher interest rate borrowers. The Financial Times say regulators concerned about assessments of creditworthiness in the country's corporate bond market. The report says the PBOC directed credit ratings agencies in April to review high credit ratings, especially for bonds with much higher yields than government debt. Let's take a look at the markets this morning. Equities across the world are broadly selling off. You can see the sell-off accelerating a little bit there in Asia, down by almost 2% today. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index down substantially this morning. Euro Stoxx 50 really holding the sort of losses there at about 1% heading into the session. And of course, the Nasdaq 100 futures down by 1.5% this morning. Coming up next, we'll get you much more with the markets with Lale Akoner, who is the global market analyst at eToro. This is Bloomberg. Live from Brussels, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Oliver Crook with your top stories. Oil spikes as the U.S. and Iran trade a new wave of attacks. Both claim control over the Strait of Hormuz as the ceasefire hangs yet again in the balance. And tech leads global stocks lower. Chip giant SK Hynix tanking on the Kospi today after surging in its U.S. debut on Friday. And a reshuffle in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy removes his prime minister as the country seeks new support from allies both in Brussels and in Paris. Good morning. Let's get a check-in on the markets this morning. We're seeing a broad sell-off across equities that is gathering a little bit of pace. You can see it there. The MSCI Asia Pacific down by 2.25% this morning, and the Euro Stoxx futures now also gaining a little bit in the losses there, down by 1.1%. And of course, NASDAQ futures really sort of taking it away there, 1.5% lower. Looking at the AI trade, everything technology, but of course, looking very closely also at the commodity market, where we find Brent oil this morning trading higher after some of those disputed claims over whether or not the Strait of Hormuz is open or closed. Brent there up by 4.5%, still there just below $80 a barrel, up by $3.4. The Bloomberg Dollar Index up by about 1/8% this morning. Of course, U.S. yield, something we're tracking very carefully this week ahead of U.S. inflation. Some of that testimony from Fed Chair Warsh. U.S. yields this morning up by 2 basis points, yielding 4.58%. Time now for your front pages from across the world, starting with the Financial Times, which leads on the latest U.S. strikes in Iran. It says there is a full risk of return to full-scale war, with the ceasefire agreement on the absolute verge of collapse. And the Wall Street Journal leads on the death of Senator Lindsey Graham. The paper describes saving Ukraine as his final mission and says he'd return from a trip to Kyiv more optimistic than ever about ending the war. And Les Echos in France leads on the third heat wave in less than 6 weeks. The headline says France has been overwhelmed by the heat and is slowed to a crawl. The paper says the economic impact could be severe. And we'll get a little bit more into that story and many others. And you can get a roundup from the stories you need to know to get your day started in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go. And looking now into the markets in terms of the semiconductors elsewhere, we are looking at TSMC with sales crossing their June monthly sales, a very sort of key figure there, year on year, up 67.9%. That is almost 70% year on year for June monthly sales. TSMC June sales reaching about 442 billion Taiwanese dollars there. And year-to-date sales, there again, you see it from TSMC year on year, up 35.5%. So we'll watch that very closely throughout the day. In the market reaction, oil higher and treasuries falling after the U.S. launched another round of strikes against Iran, and concerns about higher inflation and higher rates are returning now to the markets. And for more, we're very pleased to be joined by Lale, Akoner, global market strategist, analyst at eToro. Listen, before we get into sort of all your sort of broader theories about what is going to happen, you've got some very detailed notes. I'd like to just get your perspective about what we saw over the weekend. How much is the Iran conversation going to play into the discussions about where these markets are going to go, and specifically where inflation is going to go?
Sure. I think market is going to start pricing in a longer lasting geopolitical shock rather than a brief disruption. Since it's been past 2 weeks, it looks like tensions are still very much there. I think what it means for markets is, again, oil remains the swing factor. I think that, it's not about Hormuz technically being open. It's just about how much oil will actually move through it. So I do think that inflation risks are obviously coming back, and we will see that especially in interest rates and long duration growth stocks. Technology could come under pressure. Obviously, we have Kevin Warsh and other Fed speakers this week. This US CPI this week. So we'll take a look at whether inflationary pressures are again on the rise, and therefore what it means for the market. But again, I think that broader pressure on the market will continue.
Yeah, and thinking a little bit of some of the events that we're watching this week, starting with the U.S. sort of CPI figure, does it become sort of irrelevant now because the sort of inflation complex is moving so swiftly? Or, as some of our strategists were saying, if you see a print that's a little bit hot, is that just going to sort of gas up fears incredibly, just given the fact that we have so much uncertainty now in the Strait of Hormuz?
I think they will definitely look at how the basket is doing in terms of which parts of the basket is coming under pressure and where they, again, inflationary pressures are starting to show. I do believe that they will also take into account the fact that, again, tensions are back. So obviously, along with unemployment data that will come later, I think that, it will be very important actually for the Fed's decision and Kevin Warsh's interest rate path going forward for the rest of the year.
And what can Kevin Warsh say in the testimony this week? I think obviously there's the rate path, there is discussion about that. He is somebody who does not necessarily want to give a lot of forward guidance, but we're still sort of developing our theory of Kevin Warsh as Fed chair. What are you looking for this week?
We are looking for, especially what he's going to say about the balance sheet policy. I do believe that while the market is very much focused on interest rate policy, the balance sheet policy is going to be especially important. I would look for any type of hints about what he is willing to do regarding that and what that would mean for liquidity in the market going forward. Obviously, if they want to privatize the Fed balance sheet and make banks take more of that task on, if you will, I think that will have a major implication for markets going forward. Obviously, this is not a story for this year. I think it's a more long-term story going forward. But again, along with obviously what he thinks about inflation expectations and the ongoing war and again, inflationary pressures that we talked about, that's where I will be looking for, again, the balance sheet policy and the task forces that any updates on task forces, if you will be very important for us to understand.
And I'd like to get your update on the sort of AI trade and where you're seeing things going. Obviously, you were talking about a rotation potentially out of the Magnificent Seven. Where do you anticipate, where should we be rotating? Where should we be focusing our attention now looking into the second half of this year?
I think, again, rotation is very much on, which we think that actually quite healthy for the overall market because it means that more stocks are participating. Average stock is performing better as opposed to, say, the past few quarters. So we like, say, financials, industrials, healthcare, and obviously small caps. That all being said, that the inflationary pressures and the tensions in the Middle East is very important to monitor going forward. But we also say that just take a look at your portfolio to see whether you have too much AI in portfolios. I think that it's very easy to pile on to this theme through different ETFs, especially these niche ETFs that are being offered to clients, especially retail clients all the time. We just say that, okay, just be cautious about over concentration in your own portfolios as well, as it very much is correlated with the concentration that we're seeing in the market at the moment with the Mag 7.
And as ever, I'm always looking for an optimistic story on Europe and, of course, earnings season as we enter here. And analysts are saying that effectively they're raising their expectations for earnings at the fastest pace that we've seen in Europe in about 2 years. What are your expectations for earnings in Europe? And is that one of the places where investors should be looking to rotate into?
I think especially now that, interest rates are very much going higher and therefore long duration stocks in the US coming under pressure, we might actually see that rotation playing out, especially here in Europe. We do like financials in Europe. We like industrials, some of the tech names as well. And obviously defense is very strong here. I do also expect a strong earnings season here in Europe. But again, I think it's also about what happens in the interest rates and the market and the Middle East tensions and Middle East tensions in general, whether that will create this inflationary environment and therefore market pressure in Europe as well.
Well, Lale Akoner, thank you so much for your time, global market analyst there at eToro. Now, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham died unexpectedly over the weekend at the age of 71. It sets up a succession drama in the state less than 4 months before the midterm elections. Speaking to NBC Meet the Press, President Trump says he has a candidate in mind to take over that seat.
I have somebody that I think would be great, but I don't want to say it now because it just, it's too soon with Lindsey. I don't want to even talk about anybody, but I do have somebody that I think is really good. The governor's a good friend of mine. I've endorsed him. I endorsed him early on, and he endorsed me right from the beginning as a person that never did this before.
For more, let's bring in Bloomberg Managing Editor Jill Deisis. Jill, just first of all, very surprising news. We saw Lindsey Graham obviously on tour in Ukraine. We saw him there in Ankara last week in Turkey, looking, completely fine. What do we know so far about what happened to Senator Graham, and what does it mean critically for U.S. domestic policy?
Yes, good morning, Oliver. So what happened was a very sudden health issue involving what sounds like a torn aortic valve. So his death came very, very suddenly. As you mentioned, he literally had just come back from a trip to Ukraine. In terms of what this means for the succession plans, so you just heard Trump speaking there. The South Carolina governor will appoint somebody to fill Lindsey Graham's seat through the duration of his term, but then he was also up for re-election for later this year in the midterms. There is a Democratic candidate running then. There will be a special Republican primary later this year ahead of that election, during which that could potentially set up some infighting within the party. I will point out, though, that despite the fact that the Republicans will have to nominate someone new for this election, this is a deeply red state, very conservative. It is very unlikely that the Democratic challenger will prevail. But again, it does kind of open up that window, particularly when there are some policies that Lindsey Graham supported, including the war in Iran, that were growing more unpopular with voters nationwide.
And also, Graham was a very influential figure in foreign policy, one of the most hawkish, I would say, probably in the United States, and certainly in this version of the Republican Party. Where does it leave U.S. allies, particularly Ukraine?
Yes, absolutely one of the most hawkish senators in the party. You saw him again, as we've been discussing, go to Ukraine just within the last few days. Now, remember, when Trump was ultimately elected, returned to the White House, I mean, he was campaigning on this idea of not being a particularly interventionist president. Lindsey Graham is very pro-intervention, has been in favor of a lot of these conflicts, including getting the U.S. involved in the war in Ukraine. And so as that war in particular has dragged on for as long as it has been going, I mean, you're talking about a senator that was very close to Donald Trump, was sort of speaking in his ear about wanting the U.S. to continue support there, had made trips to Ukraine, I think no less than 10 times over the course of the conflict. And so you are seeing somebody that for some of these nations that may be looking for additional U.S. support, you've lost a pretty tremendous ally there. We'll have to see how that ultimately impacts, the president's thinking on a lot of these issues going forward. But certainly, I mean, when you're looking at, proponents for some of these conflicts, the U.S. is involvement in these conflicts. Lindsey Graham was up there as one of the biggest.
Yeah, and another sort of senator, this time whose sort of health has been on very sort of public display and a great concern is Senator Mitch McConnell. We got an update from his office as well over his health. What did we learn?
Yes, that's right. So Mitch McConnell, 84 years old, he's been missing from public view since the middle of last month, so really about a month now. There were a lot of rumors and speculation about his health. He's had some health scares in the past. He has just released a statement along with a photograph of him in what appears to be either hospital or rehabilitation facility with his wife. He's saying that he suffered from a fall and then was hospitalized with pneumonia. He's not yet well enough to return to the Senate, but that he is undergoing some rehabilitation there. So again, another senator who again has had several health scares, particularly in the last few years. But he is saying that he is recovering. You're seeing that photo that he's released just now, along with that statement. And he says, he hopes to be back in the Senate, but ultimately is not ready to return at this time.
Well, Jill Deisis, thank you so much there for an update on some of the action we've seen there over in the United States from the Senate. And coming up next, researchers say record-breaking heat waves have caused more than 2,700 deaths in England and Wales. This is a story that we're tracking very closely, not just in the UK, but of course across the European continent. We'll have more on that next. And this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. According to an estimate by researchers at Imperial College London, this summer's record-breaking heat wave may have resulted in more than 2,700 deaths in England and Wales. The World Health Organization has warned that the extreme temperatures are only, quote, a dress rehearsal for what is still to come. Very sort of grim warning there. We're joined now by Bloomberg Power and Renewables reporter Joe Words. So, Joe, take us a little bit through this report, giving us some of the details. Obviously, a huge concern in the United Kingdom, but also elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right. So researchers looked at sort of the historical mortality and also the temperatures and did modeling for the first two heat waves that hit the UK and found that 2,700 people likely died. 500 of those alone from the really early heat wave that we saw in May. This was a very unusual event that occurred very early in the season for Europe. And the other deaths from the record-breaking heat wave in June. And, you know, we've seen thousands and thousands of deaths across Europe from these repeated heat waves. 5,000 in Germany, the health authorities there said last week, and thousands more in Spain and France, and really as the researchers and governments in these different countries start to take a look at the numbers, I think everyone thinks we're going to see more and more deaths attributed to these extreme temperatures.
And of course, the human toll sort of runs front and center for everybody. But of course, there's also a toll to infrastructure, which is another sort of part of this conversation. And also a question about whether or not now, since the sort of climate agenda has fallen steadily to the back burner, is this something that sort of revives interest in that and actually points to the necessity of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, infrastructure is incredibly vulnerable. We're seeing now across Europe wildfires really start ticking up. The relentless heat and low rainfall have really baked vegetation into wildfire fuel, and we're seeing devastating fires in Spain. 13 people died there. Their worst wildfire in years, probably since 2017. And you're right about infrastructure. I mean, things just aren't able to withstand the heat. I mean, we've seen trains everywhere get canceled. We've seen nuclear plants in France have to curtail output due to hot rivers and rising or dropping rather river levels there, which affect the water that the plants can use for cooling, and regulations on how hot that water can be when it leaves the plant. And really every bit of infrastructure has been touched by this. In France, there's been a lot of alarm about temperatures affecting health infrastructure. France just last week agreed to send 30,000 air conditioning units to hospitals at a cost of €100 million immediately, and even more cooling equipment having to be dispatched to hospitals over the long term. So anybody in charge of any system that we rely on day to day for people's lives and livelihoods, people are really thinking about how to adapt it for these extreme summer temperatures.
Well, Joe Words, thank you so much for your time today. That's Bloomberg's weather and climate reporter out of London. Now to some other top stories we're following this morning. The French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has extended her poll lead ahead of next April's presidential election. A survey by Elab suggests that Le Pen would get as much as 35.5% of the first-round vote. That is 3 points higher than it was back in March. Le Pen has recently been cleared to stand by an appeals court, which shortened her election ban while upholding her conviction for embezzling EU funds. And Andy Burnham, the UK's presumptive next prime minister, is reportedly considering unveiling a bolstered budget later this year. According to the Financial Times, one idea officials are exploring is merging the annual budget with the spending review for departments, which is typically held separately. And police in the UK have arrested a man on suspicion of murdering the former minister and Reform UK politician Anne Widdecombe. The suspect is a 28-year-old white British national who was arrested in South Yorkshire. Widdecombe was found dead in her home in Devon on Thursday, having suffered serious injuries. Police believe she'd been attacked the day before. And a quick correction here and clarification. A story earlier about Softbank considering buying a stake in 7&i. We said PayPal was involved in the bid. It's actually Japanese payments company PayPay, which is looking at joining the acquisition. Plenty more coming up. We'll set you up for the week ahead with earnings season kicking off here in Europe, but also in the United States. A busy week for the Federal Reserve. And of course, that all-important U.S. inflation data. That's coming up next. And this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Some of the charts that we are watching today ahead of some of the important action throughout the week. We are looking this morning at Brent, the unrefined crude oil versus the refined products. We've got a record and the sort of spread of the pricing of those two products. The price of refined petroleum products remain as high as if crude was trading at $100 a barrel. We've of course come down fairly rapidly over the last couple of weeks, down to about $80 a barrel for Brent this morning. Obviously, this is an important story. It hits the consumers because they're not buying crude oil. They are buying gasoline and diesel and things like that. It goes into the calculations of inflation. And of course, it's something that Trump has complained a lot about and talking about targeting oil companies. But it's possible that they may have limited influence. Of course, part of this story is the Ukrainians knocking out a huge amount of, for example, that Russian refining capacity that is having an effect on those cargoes that can ship. We're also watching earnings season this week. We've got a lot of earnings on deck here from the United States. You can see here looking at the different, the sort of market cap being presented in terms of earnings this week of $5.9 trillion and sort of building into next week about $13 trillion worth of market cap reporting then, and really sort of culminating there for the last week of July where we get almost $25 trillion worth of reporting. We'll be watching it very closely this week as we watch U.S. banks kicking off earnings season tomorrow, and of course watching the Federal Reserve and Kevin Warsh's testimony. But of course here in Europe it's also earnings season, and it is an earnings season that may be a little bit more optimistic than we have seen in a while. Here we have analysts raising European earnings estimates for basically the first time at that sort of pace in more than 2 years. We're expecting that basically after 2 years of uninterrupted downgrades, analysts now raising that at the fastest pace since the mid-2024. European profits are expected to rise 12% this season. That's the highest growth in more than 3 years, according to the data that we have put together over at Bloomberg Intelligence. Of course, though, all of this is susceptible to some changes and some vulnerabilities to the downside with the war in Iran, and of course the sort of shipments and through the Strait of Hormuz bearing drastically on European energy prices. To access, search, and save all the Bloomberg terminal charts used on this show and across Bloomberg TV, terminal chart subscribers can go to the function CHRT Go. And the things we're watching a little bit later this week, Tuesday is a big day. It kicks off U.S. CPI data. We're watching that very closely for any hints on where inflation is going. And of course, Kevin Warsh testifying before the House Banking Committee or the Senate before Tuesday, where we get the U.S. bank earnings, as we were mentioning there, that kicks off. And of course, Wednesday here in Europe, one of the companies we watch most closely, one of the most important in Europe, ASML earnings. The opening trade is up next, and this is Bloomberg.